The sky over Jerusalem that morning was the color of old bone, pale, flat, without warmth. It was the season of Passover, when the city swelled with pilgrims from every corner of the known world. Tens of thousands of people crowded the narrow limestone streets, their sandals scraping the ancient stones, their voices layering into a constant, restless hum. The smell of roasting lamb drifted through the air, mingling with dust and sweat, and the sharp green scent of hyssop bundled in doorways. Jerusalem in Passover week was a city wound tight as a drum. The Roman occupiers paced their parapets, watching for any spark that might catch and burn. The religious authorities moved through the courts of the temple with hard, purposeful faces. And somewhere in a courtyard of the governor's residence, a man stood alone, bruised, bleeding, bound with rope around his wrists. His name was Jesus, from the small Galilean town of Nazareth. A carpenter's son, a teacher of extraordinary words, a healer who had touched the untouchable, who had called dead men by name and watched them walk. For 3 years, he had moved through this troubled land like a light moving through a dark room. And now the darkness had gathered itself, and the question hanging over everything, the question that would change every century that came after, was whether that light was about to go out forever. They had arrested him in the night, in an olive garden on the slope of the Mount of Olives, where the trees were so old their trunks had twisted into shapes like kneeling figures. One of his 12 closest friends had handed him over for 30 pieces of silver, the price of a common slave. The rest had scattered into the shadows. By the time the sun rose, Jesus had already been dragged before the high priest, then before Herod, and now before Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor, a man who had the power of life and death, and who clearly wanted none of this trouble. Pilate looked at the man before him. He saw no crime. He said so 3 times. His own wife sent a message from inside the house. She had dreamed about this man, and the dream had frightened her. "Have nothing to do with that righteous man," she wrote. Pilate hesitated. But the crowd outside, a crowd that had been stirred and shaped by voices with an agenda, began to chant. "Release Barabbas," they shouted, "a known criminal, a murderer. Crucify Jesus." The chanting grew louder, more rhythmic, more like a heartbeat that the whole city had caught. Pilate called for a bowl of water and washed his hands in front of the crowd, a gesture that fooled no one, least of all himself. They put a crown on Jesus, not gold, but a circle of thorns, each spine as long as a finger, pressed down into his skull. They dressed him in a purple robe and mocked him. Soldiers who had seen real brutality laughed. Someone struck him across the face. Then they stripped the robe away and gave him his cross to carry, the raw, heavy, splintered timber that he would drag through the city streets, up the long, climbing road to the hill outside the walls called Golgotha, which means, in the local tongue, the place of the skull. The road was crowded. People lined the streets. Some wept. Some jeered. A woman in the crowd reached toward him, and he looked at her, and something in that gaze broke her open entirely. A man named Simon, from the city of Cyrene in North Africa, a stranger, just in town for the festival, was pulled from the crowd and made to carry the cross when Jesus could no longer manage its weight. Simon had not planned this morning. No one had. They arrived at Golgotha just before 9 in the morning. The soldiers drove the nails. It is difficult to speak of what happened next without going quiet. The gospel writers themselves go quiet in these moments. They record what happened with a stark, careful plainness, as if the facts themselves are almost too large to be adorned. Jesus of Nazareth was crucified between 2 criminals, one on his right, one on his left, and above his head, a sign nailed by Pilate's order read, "The King of the Jews," in 3 languages, so everyone could read it. Some who passed by called out in mockery, "If you are the Son of God, come down from the cross." The religious leaders, men of learning and position, said much the same. Even one of the criminals crucified beside him joined in. But the other criminal, this broken man with no reputation left to protect, turned his head and said, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." And through cracked lips and labored breath, Jesus answered, "Truly I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise." Near the foot of the cross stood a small cluster of women who had refused to leave. His mother, Mary, was among them. The disciple John was there. And Jesus, looking down at his mother's face, a face that had sung to him and worried over him, and searched for him when he was lost at 12 years old in the temple courts, said to John, "Behold your mother." And to Mary, "Behold your son." Even here, even now, tending to the ones he loved. Then, at noon, the sun simply stopped. Not a cloud. The ancient witnesses describe it differently than an eclipse. The sky turned dark, and the darkness lasted 3 hours. Over the whole land. The darkness of that Friday afternoon was real. The grief was real. The nails were real. And yet the world measures time, before and after, from the life of the man they crucified on a hill outside Jerusalem in the springtime, when the whole city smelled of roasting lamb and the ancient promise of freedom. He carried it all the way to the end, and the end was not the end.